Close your eyes and imagine. What if the things in life that cause us the greatest pain, the things that bring us grief, are challenges? Challenges designed to help us grow, to ultimately become what we were always meant to be. We feel like we've been buried, but what if, like a seed, we've been planted? And having been planted, we grow to become a mighty tree. Now, open your eyes. Open your eyes to this way of viewing life. Come with me as we explore your true, infinite, eternal nature. This is Grief to Growth, and I am your host, Brian Smith. Hi, everybody. This is Brian Smith back with another episode of Grief to Growth, and I've got a guest with me today. His name is Robert Perry, and I'm going to introduce Robert, and then we're going to have a conversation about a really fascinating topic that I'm excited about introducing you guys to. Robert is one of the most respected teachers of the modern spiritual path, which is called A Course in Miracles. Robert is the editor of the complete and annotated edition of A Course in Miracles. He's the founder of the Circle of Atonement, which is at www.circleofa.org, and I'll put that in the show notes. And Robert has also authored or co-authored over 20 books and booklets on the course, as well as hundreds of articles, and he's lectured throughout the U.S. and internationally. Robert's goal has been to draw out of the course a comprehensive understanding of the path that it lays down and to support students in walking that path. And I'm really excited about introducing you guys to A Course in Miracles because I've always wanted to introduce you to different ways, different tools of understanding spirituality. And this is a pretty intense way of understanding it that's, I think a lot of people will be interested in. So with that, I want to welcome to the show, Robert Perry.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Robert, I'm really excited about talking to you today, and I appreciate you doing this. A Course in Miracles, I first heard of it probably 5 or 6 years ago. I was attending a Unity church, and they were talking about this thing called A Course in Miracles. So explain to me, what is A Course in Miracles?
Well, A Course in Miracles is, in form, it's just a book. It's a 3-volume book with the text, a workbook, and manual for teachers. But it's really a spiritual path. The book is designed to lead you through a process of development in which you first learn and internalize and experience and demonstrate a set of teachings.
So what is the source? Where did A Course in Miracles come from?
Yeah, that's part of. Its identity is rooted in a very unusual and interesting story.
Mm-hmm.
A woman named Helen Schucman, who was a psychologist and at Columbia University in New York City, she and a colleague, Bill Thetford, who was the head of the psychology department, not at Columbia University, but at sort of a place associated with them, the College of Physicians and Surgeons. They worked together for several years, starting in 1958. So this goes back quite a ways. And they experienced a great deal of conflict in their own relationship as colleagues, and also conflict in their department and with other departments and medical centers, and just everywhere in their professional lives, there was conflict. And finally, it got to be too much, and Bill Thetford sort of gave a speech to Helen Schucman in which he said, essentially, there must be a better way. There must be a way in which people can essentially get along with each other and cooperate rather than compete. And so she said, okay, I'll join you in that. It was a sort of a rare moment of harmony between them. And that seemingly, ordinary, non-spiritual event, they knew it was life-changing, but it didn't have any spiritual content to it. They weren't believers in anything. Helen professed to be a militant atheist. That was a trigger. She began, this was in 1965, she began having a series of interesting inner visions and heightened dreams and also paranormal experiences. And then several months later, in October of 65, she heard an inner voice say, "This is A Course in Miracles, please take notes."
Wow.
So she began to take down, very out of character for her, to take down a series of teachings by an inner voice that she heard. And this process went on for about 7 years. And she would take these teachings down as she heard them, word for word, in her shorthand notebooks. So she'd do it in handwriting and shorthand symbols. And then she would dictate what she'd taken down to her colleague, Bill Thetford, and he would type it up.
Wow.
And it was they called it their guilty secret. They were afraid of losing their reputations professionally.
Mm-hmm.
They shared it with very few people, but eventually they shared it with certain key people, and it escaped into the wild. People began reproducing the material on Xerox machines, and a pressure grew to publish it. It was finally published in 1976.
Interesting. Yeah, I did not know the full history of that. So this is a person who, as you said, was a professed militant atheist and started having these channelings, I guess, right? So downloads.
Essentially, right. And the source of the material, this is something that is controversial and uncomfortable for many students of it,
mm-hmm.
but the source of the material clearly speaks as if this is Jesus talking
mm-hmm.
to her.
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting that, a lot of us have faith in the Bible, and we say that's the word of God, and that's not even necessarily professed to be channeled. So there's no reason why. I was attending a Unity church when I came across A Course in Miracles, and one of the tenets, actually it was a church before that, I was at United Church of Christ, and one of the things they used to say was, God is still speaking. So if God could inspire people 2,000 years ago, then certainly God could inspire people today. So.
Well, Christians believe that, of course, at least in theory. And, people do have experiences of Jesus all over the world, and not just Christians. So it's not something that in theory is considered, at least by a lot of people, to be impossible.
Yeah, well, I on my program and in my life, I talk to a lot of people who've had near-death experiences, and seeing Jesus is not uncommon when you have a near-death experience. So I know it feels a little bit uncomfortable maybe to say this material is channeled by Jesus, but for me and for my audience, I think it's not that big of a reach. But I think, as the Bible says, kind of the proof is in the pudding. It's like what type of fruit is this tree bearing? And when you talk about A Course in Miracles and being a spiritual path, the thing is, does it lead to development? Does it lead people to be better people?
Well, I think very often it has a absolutely, life-changing, positive effect on people's lives. I think that we're still trying to get a handle on what this book is and what we do with it and what it says. And I think for a lot of people, it gets misused. But I know so many people count the Course as absolutely key to turning their lives around and making them more loving and forgiving and generous people.
Yeah, and that's been my experience. I haven't gone through the Course, as I was telling you before we got started recording. I've kind of dabbled in it a little bit. When I was going to the Unity Church, they had a weekly teaching on it. I went to that a couple of times, and I downloaded an app which gave me some little bits of it here and there. But my experience with people that have been through the Course, as you said, they like just rave about how it's changed their life and changed their perspective. And one of the things that I think is key to getting through this life and being and doing it well is understanding who we are. And I think a lot of us have forgotten who we are. And that's one thing that I got out of when I did study the Course, is that we've forgotten who we are as human beings and why we're here. And I think the Course does a pretty good job of explaining that.
Yeah, that's a core teaching of the Course. And in talking about that, I often reference near-death experiences because one of the things I've been into them since Life After Life came out in 1975, but in the last 10 years or so, I've really gotten into NDEs because there is an enormous amount of crossover between the truths that people learn in their NDE and the teachings in A Course in Miracles. In fact, a colleague of mine and I, about 5-6 years ago now, wrote a very lengthy article comparing the teachings of A Course in Miracles with the philosophical perspectives people take away from NDEs, that got published in the Journal of Near-Death Studies, which is the peer-reviewed journal that for NDE studies. And it was a very long article because there is an enormous amount of crossover there. So what the Course teaches about what we are, who we are, is that we may appear to be humans, but in fact, we are divine beings. In our true nature, we are pure spirit. There's no bodily component. We are limitless. We are perfect. We are holy. We are made of pure love. We are the kind of being that if we knew we were that being, we would have unlimited self-esteem. And what I find, one of the things I find out of many things so interesting about NDEs is that people often have this experience where they say, I was still myself, but I was not, the human I knew. I was not a body. And sometimes people experience themselves exactly as A Course in Miracles teaches us, that they were just pure spirit. There was no form. They were eternal. They were without limit. And it's fascinating to see those reports when that's exactly what I read in the Course.
Yeah. Well, my personal belief is truth no matter where it comes from, right? And there is a C.S. Lewis called it the Tao, that there's this eternal truth that predates even existence. And it comes to us through many channels, and it comes to us through various religions. It comes to us, some of it's in the Bible, some of it's in Christianity, and I think some of it's come through the Course. And you're right, it's really interesting, the overlap between the near-death experience and what the Course teaches. And that to me is what resonates with me, that rings true from the Course, is that is this thing of who we are. And I think that's one of the biggest problems we have on our earth right now, is as mankind, we've forgotten who we are. And that leads us to all kinds of mistakes and problems. And I think returning to those roots and understanding could, provide a miracle, could actually be miraculous.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, if we really believed not only that we are divine beings, but if we believe that about other people, that regardless of what they've done, they're not sinners, they still have limitless value, they are our equal, no matter what appearances may say. If we had that picture of others, I mean, we'd be living in a completely different world.
Yeah. And I guess, and correct me if I'm wrong, but is A Course kind of a systematic way of getting from here to there?
That's what it's about. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not just a set of teachings, it's a course. So it's in form modeled after like an educational course where you've got a text, you've got a workbook with practical exercises, you have a manual for teachers, for those who in some sense will, having studied and practiced the principles, go on to teach them. It's trying to take you through a whole process. So for instance, the text is like a series of lectures. It's not, it's in written form, but each section in the text, and there is about 250 of them, will introduce a new subject, rolling in old material, referencing old material and building on that, but then adding something new. So it's like you're in a very long lecture series.
So what are some of the teachings? We talked about the fact that we are divine beings and we're all equal. What are some of the other teachings from the Course?
Well, I mean, it's hard to know where to start. I guess I'll pick a starting place, but the Course is, I often say, it's like an ocean. There are hundreds and probably thousands of concepts, and they all interweave with all the other ones. So there's an enormous amount of depth and variety of wisdom in there. But from my standpoint, it really starts with the Course's view of God. And in my experience, in sort of outside of traditional spirituality, when you're in alternative circles, New Thought, New Age, Eastern spirituality, I think we tend to shy away from the whole God topic because a lot of us feel a bit scarred by God in traditional religion.
Yes.
So what the Course does is it presents a very different vision of God than the traditional one, but also very different than what you tend to encounter in alternative spirituality. Traditionally, God is loving and wrathful. Right. And we're all very familiar with that. And we tend to, for those of us who grew up in church, like I did, we tend to, carry some of that, fear of God. And I think that tends to fuel how we are once we perhaps leave traditional religion. We gravitate towards a God who above all is safe. And I think therefore we tend to gravitate towards a somewhat impersonal God.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. Yeah. Yeah,
where God is more like a presence or an energy or a suchness than
yeah.
a being.
I have to confess to that. I grew up in a church with this guy who was judgmental, and I just had this conversation with someone yesterday because we were studying near death experiences and we were reading a book about it. And in the book, the author kept using the word God in one of the chapters, and this person pushed back and said, "I almost put the book down. It really
Mhm.
turned me out because you kept talking about God so much." So there is in that new age, new thought, near death community, there's almost this pushback against the personal God. So how does the Course address that?
Well, the Course's picture of God, which I think is practically identical to what near-death experiencers so often experience, which I can get to in a bit. But
Hmm.
but the Course's picture of God is not an impersonal God. It's almost as if you took the traditional God who has this loving side, he cares about us, he wants the best for us, he wants to spend eternity with us, and he has this wrathful side where for some reason because he's just, he has to punish us for our sins and he has
Yeah.
to throw people in hell forever, and the sins have to be paid for, and that's the vision of the traditional view of the crucifixion,
Hmm.
where someone had to pay. Um, if you take that picture and you just completely remove the wrathful side,
Hmm.
so that the God of the Course is literally incapable of even the tiniest hint of anger.
Hmm.
He's just, the Course uses the language of he, but there's an understanding that there's no gender to God.
Right.
Um, but still, this God has a kind of a personhood. He has no form, no body. He has no limits. He's pure spirit. He doesn't change. He's absolutely infinite, but he still has thoughts. He still has feelings. He still has will and intention. He has a plan for
Hmm.
our salvation. Um, but in all of that, it's like he is just love personified. If you could take love and make love conscious so that love
Hmm.
was a person,
Hmm.
that's what this God would be like. So he is absolutely pure, overwhelmingly intense love,
Yeah.
for all of us as a whole and for each of us individually. And what I find so interesting about NDEs, well, again, one of the things, uh, is that people frequently have, and one of my favorite NDE books is by Jeffrey Long, God and the Afterlife. I don't know if you've read
I'm
that
not
one.
familiar with that one now.
Yeah, it's a really good one. He details all these experiences where people have encountered with God, and they are remarkably consistent,
Hmm.
and they are so striking because the God they encounter has personhood. You can tell from their story,
Yeah.
but what they encounter is unbelievably unearthly love. So one of my favorite NDE quotes about this is this guy was saying that he said he was in front of this great light. He said it had to be God, and he said it was like, how did he put it? He said it was like you're standing 6 feet from the sun. He said only instead of heat, you experience love,
Wow.
infinite love. And that's what you hear people describe again and again from their NDEs, a love that makes the best love on earth seem like an absolute drop in the bucket, like 1/1,000,000th of the real thing, something that we can't understand or describe. It has to be experienced to know what they're talking about.
Yeah. It's funny because as you were saying that, I was thinking about some of the people I've interviewed. My friend Penny Whitbrot, who had several near-death experiences
Mm.
and tried to describe the love of God. And you were saying you had seen my interview with Tony Woody.
Yeah,
And as
yeah,
I was watching his face, he was just like, I wish I could describe it. And he goes on for like 5 minutes describing it and says, I can't describe it. Or so that's
yeah.
very common with people with the NDEs. So that's when I hear the Course say that, and I hear what people with NDEs say, that's what rings true to me, that must be true.
Yeah. And it's something that feels true, even though it's not part of our conceptual, you know, uh, framework right now. Like, what religion has taught us that?
Yeah, that's a good point because when I think about it, there does seem like the Eastern religions tend to depersonalize this force, for lack of a better word, or source, and then the Western religions that personalizes God made him into just a big man with all the problems that we have.
Right. And with the dual sides of humans, we can be good and we can be bad.
Yeah.
What I like about Tony's description, I mean, gets so I've seen a video of his, and then I also listened to your podcast,
Hmm.
and he gets so passionate. And what he talks about is the best way I've come to be able to describe it. So he had the experience like nearly 40 years ago,
Yeah.
and he's been ever since trying to think of the best way to describe what he experienced. That says something by itself.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So that's one plus for the course. I think that and I'm really glad you brought that up because something I didn't really understand about it, but I think it's very important because for myself, just speaking personally, I was scarred by the idea I had of God, and it scarred me for a very, very long time. And then as I said, I didn't really think about this until you put it this way. I think I overcorrected, and I depersonalized God, and then I hear near-death experiences say, well, God is love. It's like, well, but love is got to be at least somewhat personal. I mean, you can't have a totally depersonalized love.
Oh yeah, and if you look at their reports, they are spoken to by
Yeah.
this God. They're often sent back against their will.
Hmm.
So there's they feel tremendous power and intelligence. So yeah, I mean, even when they don't say it was a being, it's clear that there are personal qualities to the God they experienced.
Yeah. So what about why we're here? I think that's another big question people have. What is the purpose of this life? And so, what does the course talk about? How does it address that?
Yeah, well, the course, like I say, its starting point is God,
Hmm.
and to to get to why we're here, I probably should say a bit about its overall worldview, which is
Hmm.
really different than our conventional worldview or any worldview that we've encountered in normal society. Um, but the great thing about that worldview is it makes love and forgiveness make sense. Very often, we want to love, we want to forgive, but it seems like it's not rational, right? It's like, given what they did, given who they are, how can I love them? How can I forgive them? It's
Hmm.
not rational. What the Course does is it gives a whole worldview in which, in light of that worldview, suddenly it does make sense. It is the rational response to love someone regardless, to forgive them regardless. So to kind of give a short version of that worldview, we start with this God who is pure love and pure spirit, and he creates, but like any creator, he creates after himself, like himself. An artist creates out of what's within him. And so this God creates all of us. He doesn't create a physical world or a universe. He creates us as spirit. Okay. And we are just like him. We are pure spirit. We're perfect. We're absolutely loving. We're so loving that we're holy. There's no imperfection or sin or error in us at all. And we're eternal. We're forever. Um, but, and the Course never quite says exactly how it happened, uh, a lot of us fall asleep to that state. We decide to separate from God. We can't actually separate because we're part of God. We're in God.
Hmm.
So we just fall asleep to where we are and to who we are. And in this state of sleep, where in sleep you kind of don't know what's going on, you're not really rational, you don't really know where you are, you think you're in dream environments when you're really in bed.
Hmm.
You can't even dream you're somebody else, not the person you are. In this sleep, we begin to experience a collective dream, and that dream, according to the Course, is the origin of the physical universe. From the Course's standpoint, and it has a lot of teachings you can find in places, or at least similar teachings you can find,
Hmm.
but it also has very bold departures. And one of its points of departure is it says, look at this world. Everything dies. Things are in competition. There's, things are characterized by separation. We're all locked in these bodies where we can't really join with others. We're always in our little cubicle.
Yeah.
We're vulnerable. Would a loving God create a world like that? So one of the things the Course says is, He is not mad. God is not mad, yet only madness makes a world like this. So from the Course's standpoint, this world is our dream of being separate from God. We're not really separate from God. We're, just like any dreamers in bed, we are in God. But we're having a very lengthy, very stable, very long-term dream that we're dreaming together, in which we dream that we're these separate humans that are just full of flaws and foibles, and that when we're in competition with each other and so on. And so from the Course's standpoint, our purpose here is to go through a developmental process of healing the mind that's dreaming, so that it can ultimately wake up. But it's not about like just getting out of here. It's about we wake up through a developmental process in which we become more loving and forgiving people, and more giving people. And through that, we start to learn that, hey, maybe we're not so flawed as we thought. Maybe we're divine. There's that old poem that says, to err is human, to forgive divine. Well, if all you do is forgive, wouldn't you become convinced you're divine?
Yeah. Well, it's really fascinating, because I think one of the things that every religion or philosophy tries to figure out is why. Why are we here? What's the purpose?
Right.
And so when you said this is a dream, that's a little bit different from what I've heard, but it does come back around to there is some purpose behind it, because I've kind of come to is this is like a classroom, or like a school, or like a gym, or like a boot camp, all these different analogies that we can use, where we come here, we feel the separation, we forget who we are for a little while, so that we can build our strengths, build our character, and that the lack that we experience here, the forgiveness, those are all ways that we can build ourselves and make ourselves, stronger beings.
Yeah, and I would absolutely agree with all that. And what the Course would do is just kind of give a little caveat saying, we don't actually strengthen ourselves. Our real selves are already perfect.
Yeah.
But in terms of these minds that are caught in an illusion and in a dream, they become more and more in touch with that underlying perfection. And yeah, the way it looks is one develops character that becomes ultimately godlike.
Yeah. So the forgiveness, how does that come into it? So if we have this understanding, why does it make forgiveness make sense?
Well, because if this, generally when we're trying to forgive somebody, we feel mistreated by them, right? And it can get very deep and serious. What's going on is that we think, okay, well, that was all real. They are that selfish person, that hurtful, cruel person, and they objectively did hurtful things to me. Those things may not have injured my body, maybe they did, but they definitely injured my mind and heart, my maybe even my soul, perhaps, in my belief. And therefore, because I really got hurt, I really lost, they really did it. Maybe in some sense they gained from that. They at least gained a sense of having the upper hand.
Yeah.
Based on all of that, why does it really make sense to forgive them?
Right.
I mean, is it even logical? Is it just, does it? So there's something else that says, I'd love to be free. I'd like to free them too. I'd like to forgive, but it just doesn't seem to make sense. In the Course's view, there's a whole worldview in which it does, because in this view, who I am can't really be hurt. Not really.
Right.
Who they are can't really become sinful and bad. And because of who they are, when they attack me, they don't gain anything real. They just end up losing. They feel worse about themselves somewhere inside. They feel guilty somewhere inside, because being a holy and divine being, when they behave like that, they just feel bad. Even if on an ego level, they feel, yeah, I'm superior because I put so-and-so in their place.
Yeah.
And so they're still holy and divine. I'm still holy and divine. They haven't become sinful. I haven't been injured. And therefore, it makes sense to let it go in light of how precious they are, and in light of the fact that underneath it all, we are still united, and we're
Yeah.
still in harmony.
I liked when you said let it go, because as you were going through that, it's not even, I think we get to the point where it's not even, there's nothing to forgive. It's not a
Yeah.
matter of forgiving. It's a matter of letting it go, because as you said, it's interesting we're having this conversation today because I'm reading a book by a guy who says he's enlightened, and he's giving like ideas of being enlightened and how to become enlightened. And one of the things he says is kind of what you just said. There is no real injury. And this is
Right.
really kind of an illusion and a dream. And even though it still feels very real when we're in it. And the other thing where you were talking, I was thinking about is, not only do we think the other person is we ascribe motives to that person. They hurt me on purpose. Not
Yeah.
only they
Yeah.
stepped on my foot, but they did it on purpose. Like there's they're going to gain something out of it. So if we can raise our perspective and really understand that people don't hurt people on purpose, it's an error. It's usually it's a mistake. And even the word sin in the Bible is to fall short. It's not an evil thing.
Yeah. Well, I actually do believe, and the Course does teach, that we hurt each other on purpose.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But, and I've hurt people on purpose. I hate to say, but the Course says we do that in the thought that we will gain from that.
Right.
Only an evil person would gain from intentionally hurting somebody else. And the Course says the attacker always loses.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore it says that attack, because it causes loss in the attacker, it's really a call for help. That person has lost from the experience, and their loss calls out and says, can you help me? And the help that we can give them is forgiveness.
Yeah, exactly. I think that is a better way of putting it, and I completely agree with that. So, if someone's interested in the Course in Miracles, how do you get started? Because I was saying to you earlier, it's pretty daunting. I mean, it's a big, thick book.
It is pretty daunting. It is a big, thick book. My experience, and this is why I've got a job, people need help with it usually.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's helpful to know that, the Course may be your path, but it may just be something you benefit from, in a minimal way, or something in between. So even though it is a course and it is a spiritual path, different people are meant to have different relationships with it. So I recommend, I do recommend the edition of the Course that my organization put out. It goes back to the original words that Helen Schuckman took down. So it's less edited. It's purple, and it's called the Complete and Annotated Edition.
Okay.
People tend to find it easier to get into.
Okay.
Our website has a ton of helpful articles on it, hundreds actually. We also have an online program called Course Companions. And what that will do is you can sign up to go through the text or the workbook or the manual for teachers, or all of them in sequence. And you'll get an email each day that tells you what your reading is, and that will also gives you about 1,000 words of commentary on that section or lesson, and then helps you apply it.
Oh, wow. So I could go to the circleofa.org. Is that right?
Right.
And I could find this Course Companions there?
Yeah, there'll be a link to Course Companions. It's coursecompanions.org. That's the address of the program. And then there are weekly live classes and twice monthly live Sunday gatherings. And there's a lot going on in a Facebook discussion group and so on. So there's a lot going on there. But that basically takes you by the hand and walks you through the whole book. Now, people take a while deciding they want to be walked through the book.
Yeah.
So all I would say is just, look into it, read some of the Course. I would recommend our articles on circleofa.org. There is a lot of teaching out there on the Course, and very, very different things are said.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So you'll have to decide, what approach you gravitate to. My approach and my organization's approach is very much let's draw out what the book says, regardless of our preconceptions.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we all soak up a lot from spirituality. It's a very eclectic marketplace out there. And we tend to bring those, you know, concepts that we've learned into A Course in Miracles. And for me, the beauty of the book is it's constantly saying things I never expected to read.
Mm-hmm.
And they're things that I find, you know, thought-provoking and wise and practical. So I'm always trying to draw out what the book says, regardless of what we expect it to say and regardless of what anyone out there is saying about the book.
Yeah. Well, as I said, I've dabbled in a little bit, and one of the things that I found really, really helpful, and I think I said this earlier in the interview, I think we've forgotten who we are, and we all kind of need to wake up. And the Course talks about it, even actually in that language.
Yeah.
And anything that can get me outside of my day-to-day thinking of I am this body, this is all there is. And when I was actually on the list that was sending me little bits at a time, and it would say to look at something, intentionally look at that, and realize that that's not what you're seeing. And it really helps you kind of lift to change that perspective. And these little practices that we can do on a daily basis can cause us to start to wake up, you know, to
Absolutely.
who we truly are.
Well, the workbook, which is the second volume of the Course, it's basically all about the spiritual practice the Course is teaching us. And it believes that we're not going to get there unless we are practicing during our day.
Yeah.
Applying these teachings. The Course also teaches, the workbook teaches meditation techniques. It has a heavy focus on prayer towards the latter half of it. It's a different kind of prayer, but it's still prayer.
Yeah.
So the Course wants us to be doing various mental practices that it thinks if we do them, they will wake us up.
Yeah, that's the thing that I'm starting to realize in everything that I've been studying over the last however many years. It's all about practice. Whatever path we're on, it's about practice. It's not a matter of you can go to church once a week and just become enlightened, or you can read one thing. It's about what are you doing day to day? You know, what can you incorporate into your daily life that really kind of elevates your thinking?
Yeah, it's really tempting with spirituality and with the Course in Miracles in particular to think if I just can talk about it long enough and cleverly enough and knowledgeably enough, I'm there.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't work that way.
Yeah. So, well, that's really helpful, and I appreciate you giving me a deeper understanding of what it is, and giving my audience an understanding of what it is, and how people can maybe start to get into it by going to your website, circleofa.org, and starting there and reading some of the articles about it, and see if it's a path that appeals to you. As I said, for me, kind of having something that's structured is appealing. And something that says, okay, these are the steps that you need to take. So really appreciate everything you're doing with this.
Oh, well, I'm glad to be here. It's great to talk about it. And it's interesting to hear your experience because you're exploring all kinds of things and you're taking away some of the same messages about the importance of practice, about how there is nothing to forgive. The Course says that exact line, I think, a couple of times.
Mm-hmm.
That's this whole approach to forgiveness. When you realize there's nothing to forgive, forgiveness becomes automatic.
Yeah.
So many of the things that you're saying, you know, about we've forgotten who we are, you're picking up from elsewhere, but they're also found in the Course. And it's interesting to see that.
It really is. And like I said, I started off as a fundamentalist Christian. I remember reading C.S. Lewis years ago.
Sure, me too.
He talks about this concept of the Tao, which at the time was shocking to me because he was saying the truth is not just in Christianity. It's everywhere. It's eternal. It's ubiquitous. It's all over. And it can't help but come out. And what I've found in my studies is it's all over the place. No, it's not just in Buddhism. It's not just in Taoism. It's not just in Christianity. It's not even just in the Course. These are just different ways of looking at it. And then you pile on top of that the near-death experience, and what scientists come to understand about consciousness now. And, you know, a lot of scientists are finally saying that consciousness precedes the material, which is what the Bible tells us, right? That first there was God, you know, so that's consciousness. So all these things seem to be kind of, you know, coming together. And it's wonderful that we can choose which path that we want to take that all leads to the same place.
Yeah, I personally believe, I'm a big believer that God has a plan, not just for the world, but for each one of us.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of that is there is a certain path that's kind of assigned to us.
Yeah.
And if it's A Course in Miracles, then there's nothing you can do about it. If it's not A Course in Miracles, there's nothing you can do about it. It's not your path.
Yeah.
And I think that God would be very ineffective if he talked through one thing in this world. I mean, what kind of a God would that be? I think that God and the Spirit are shining through every open window all over the world.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of paths, what does the Course say about that? Because that's a question that we talk about a lot in the groups that I'm in, because frankly, a lot of us have been through tragedy, right? I've lost a child, things like that. So what does the Course say about a plan for the world, or a plan for us as individuals?
Well, just to back up slightly, the Course says that God as God is almost so transcendent of this world that to deal with us in this world, he works through an intermediary that the Course, like Christianity, calls the Holy Spirit. Mm-hmm. The Holy Spirit is his voice through which he's speaking to us, and we can still communicate with him even though he's totally beyond form. And we're like completely form bound. So the idea is the Holy Spirit has this plan, which is also God's plan. And there's kind of two dimensions of it. One is that there's a plan, like a general plan for salvation. And the general plan is that everyone learns to forgive to the point where they're like perfect at it. And then we all kind of wake up. And the reason it's forgiveness is that what we're trying to do is to get back to love, but you can't love really while you're holding unforgiveness. Unforgiveness says, I've got a reason to withdraw love.
Yes.
Right. So to get to pure love, we have to go through a process of letting go all the stuff that gets in the way of love. So the general plan from the Course's standpoint is that everyone learns to perfectly forgive. Even if you don't use the language of forgiveness, you can still learn, the inner gesture of forgiveness. But then more specifically, the Course says that the Holy Spirit has a plan for each one of us in each situation throughout each day. And so what we need to be doing, and the Course provides training in this too, is constantly asking, what do I do here? What do I say here? How do I see this situation? What's my role here? And so if we do that, the Course says we will make very different decisions. We'll move through life in concert with God's plan for our lives.
Okay.
And ultimately we'll get to what the Course calls our special function, which is that we each have a specific role in the salvation of the world. We have unique strengths that maybe we develop them for the sake of our ego, but they can be repurposed, and they can be strengths the Holy Spirit uses so that we can actively carry out a role that's our small contribution to the salvation of the whole.
Wow, that's really cool. One other question I want to ask you, does the Course say anything about reincarnation?
It does and doesn't.
Okay.
The author, the voice that Helen Schuckman heard, he did have little references to it. But when it's addressed directly in the Course, what he says is that it's not really important.
Yeah.
That basically there's a trap in thinking that you're kind of at the effect of your past. I mean, the whole idea of forgiveness is the past really doesn't matter. And so what happens with reincarnation, it very easily can tie us to thinking, well, I did all these terrible things in the past, or terrible things were done to me, or I was some really special person in the past. So from the Course's standpoint, reincarnation, there is a potential trap there. There are potential benefits in the idea that maybe I've been in all these different bodies, but there was still a stable, unchanging me that has been there all along. So whatever I am, it's not of this body, tied to this body. That's a potential benefit.
Sure.
But his main message is, what we need to do is get free of what the Course calls the ego. And that's something we do now.
Okay.
And so that's the focus. Therefore, the issue of reincarnation is kind of beside the point. I personally think it happens. but it's not part of the thought system of the Course just because, it's not, as it says, essential to salvation.
Well, it's interesting because I find myself completely agreeing with that too, because so many people get so caught up on reincarnation, and frankly, I would say that same thing. It's not really that important. I have to live this life right here, right now, and so I'm not really concerned about past lives, and not really concerned about future lives. I don't see how that benefits me to get caught up in that. So that's my kind of thing. I think it probably happens, but I don't think it's the way we think it is. I don't think that Brian will ever exist again. I think there might be like a larger oversoul that I'm part of that will come back and have different experiences, but I don't really get caught up in it. But you did touch on another thing I want to talk about,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
you used the word ego, and that is a real trigger, I guess, for me anyway, in a lot of New Age teaching, because we're constantly supposed to battle our ego. Ego is a terrible thing. What does the Course say about ego?
Well, the Course has an interesting and perhaps somewhat different approach to the ego. What it says is the ego is a belief in being a separate being who's basically separate and on your own.
Mm-hmm.
It does characterize that belief in very negative terms. The
Mm-hmm.
ego it's not just sort of, I'm afraid. It's I want to gain from attack. I want to put others beneath me. I want to be on the top of the heap. And the ego, its view of the ego, to me, explains the terrible things that happen in this world that we do to each other. I mean, we do unbelievable things to each other. But from the Course's standpoint, the key is it's just a belief. It's a false identity. And so no matter how attacking the ego may be, and how self-centered, how egocentric, how egotistical it may be, it's not who we are. We're still, as in the Course's language, we're still the Son of God.
Okay.
And so we're still holy. We're absolutely pristine. We're untainted by anything the ego has had us do.
Yeah.
So we have to have this interesting balance in the Course where we realize that's not me, but we also don't underestimate how much we tend to identify with the ego.
Yeah. As you were saying that, because the thing is, I think about in terms of what Freud uses, id, ego, and superego, right? So
Yeah.
I think what people call the ego, I tend to think of the id,
Right.
and so I think the idea of being a separate self as a false belief, not as an entity, as something to be attacked, but as a belief to be let go of, then I can get with the ego is a bad thing, because I'm not a separate person. But on the other hand, as a human being, I'm in this body and I am a separate person. So we have this kind of dual identity. We have our real self, which is this magnificent divine being, but I am trapped in this body. But the false belief that I need to get what I need to get at the expense of you, and I'm on my own, that's something that we really need to overcome.
Yeah. Well, that's everything you said. I think the Course would agree with that. And its view of the ego has a lot of id in it, a lot of Freudian id. So what it wants us to do is learn how the ego works, understand that so much of our thinking is the voice of our ego.
Yeah, exactly.
And then be able to stand apart from it and feel like there is an I that is not the ego.
Yeah.
And then that helps me let it go.
Yeah, that is the key. That's what I'm starting to find. That is really the key. It's being able to separate and take that higher view and look at myself and say, that's not really who I am.
Yeah, because it's identifying with the ego that makes us feel guilty, that makes us feel a sense of low self-worth, that makes us feel afraid. To the extent that we can say, that's not me, then we can be free.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Robert, I know you have another appointment to get to. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this today. I'm hoping that this resonates with some people, because I'm trying to give people different paths, so you can find the path that you need to be on. As you said, a course is not for everybody, but I think it's maybe for a lot of people. So this has been a really great time to learn and understand all this.
Oh, it's been a wonderful conversation. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Well, I want to give your name again. It's Robert Perry, Perry. The website is circle of A as in atonement.org and also coursecompanion.org. Is that correct?
Coursecompanions.org. Yeah.
Coursecompanions.org. Robert, thanks a lot. Have a great weekend.
Thank you for having me. Same to you.
All right. That's it for another episode of Grief to Growth. I sure hope you got something out of it. Please stay in contact with me by reaching out at www.grieftogrowth.com. That's grief, the number 2, growth.com. Or you can text the word growth to 31996. That's simply text growth, GROWTH, to 31996. Since you're watching this on YouTube, please make sure you're subscribed. So hit the subscribe button and then hit the little bell here, and it'll notify you when I have new content. Always, please share the information if you enjoy it. That helps me to get more views and to get the message out to more people. Thanks a lot and have a wonderful day.